My name is Dr. Brennan Jacoby. I am a philosopher and the founder of Philosophy at Work, which is a business that works with companies on how they think and then how that thinking impacts what they do. Philosophy, I think, is critical for doing better business, and it goes right back to what philosophy means. If you look at the ancient Greek word philosophy, philo just means love, and Sophia means wisdom. And so when philosophers are doing philosophy, when we're doing philosophy, if we're doing it well, we should be pursuing wisdom. And one of the main ways that philosophers pursue wisdom is by working out their thinking and making sure that, as it were, the life inside their heads is consistent with life outside your head as well, so that what we're thinking is accurate, what we're thinking is true. And this is not just academically important, it's not just intellectually interesting. I think this is a business skill. I think this is critical for business today, because not only because of the sort of volume of information that we need to be able to process and think well about, but also because there's so much on the line. People are checking up on our thinking, on what we're doing, and so before we invest in a certain strategy, we need to make sure that it's well thought through. So whether or not it's for the sake of client relationships, where we need to understand trust and make sure we're thinking correctly about this trust before we try to build it, or if it's engagement with our colleagues, where we're making sure that our ideas land well with them, or indeed our ideas land well with an investor, and client relationships again, we need to get our thinking sorted and make sure that it's clear so that we can then have those ideas land well with others. As a philosopher, I think that startup culture is really exciting, because philosophers going right back to, let's say, ancient Greece and Plato have been trying to understand society and humanity and identity and values, and I feel like in startup culture, it's so often all of these things are up for grabs, and it's starting from the ground up, and we're trying to work out in a startup, well, how are we going to do things? It's very refreshing and exciting, and I think it's really interesting because you have such a vibrant space in which to experiment and try new things. You're not shackled to the way that we've always done things. A challenge, of course, around startup culture is when rules are played with loosely. That's positive in terms of curiosity, creativity, and thinking differently, but it can also be challenging because then we have to make sure that if we're going to do things differently, we have a really firm foundation on normative things like morality, what's right and what's wrong. And actually there's some really woolly things out there. If the world's changing in terms of the amount of data that we have and what we can do with data, the rule book hasn't been written yet. And in one sense that's really exciting, but it also puts a lot of responsibility on each one of us to think carefully and make sure that we're not just thinking about what we're doing now, but the longer game and what implications our actions now might have. Working out what it means to lead a company ethically in terms of investments, how we're using information, all these sorts of things is a huge challenge, and it's the challenge, I think, for us today. But one distinction is really helpful. And it goes right back to how we understand ethics. I think a lot of times ethical leadership is viewed as just CSR, corporate social responsibility, or sort of doing things that aren't going to get you into legal trouble or something like that, when in fact ethics is distinct from doing that which is legal. That's an important point because we need to have people that are maybe doing the right thing, even if it's illegal sometimes. We need to have people that are challenging the law for good causes, and throughout history we've seen that being an important part of social evolution. But the main distinction I want to say that I think is helpful is that between ethics and morality. I think a lot of times we think about ethically leading a company in terms of just being moral, but actually morality is context sensitive. So you might have a morality in one country and you can have a different morality in another country, and within those countries there might be sub-moralities. There might be moralities in different times of history. Moralities are context sensitive, but ethics as a concept is supposed to be something that reaches over that. And the job of ethics is to critique morality. So without ethics, we just have our morality, and then anyone can lead a company saying, well, this is my morality, or this is our business's morality, and it's coherent internally, and so therefore what we're doing is good. But the job of ethics is to come in and critique that. So I think part of what it means to ethically lead a company today is to be doing that critical work, to be saying, I think this is right, all the people in my business think this is right, but are we having that our morality challenged enough so that we're making sure that it's really well formed and well founded? I think it's really hard to say that leading a company ethically just means doing one thing, this thing or that thing. I don't think it's that simple. But certainly what it means to lead a company ethically does involve that critical, ethical work around your own morality and making it as well founded as possible. The initial answer to why trust is important for business is that some would say trust is at the core of every business transaction. I would actually disagree. I think that trust is important for business insofar as it enables business efficiency in our business systems. But actually, I think if we understand trust in broader terms, as in trust, trustworthiness, distrust as well, all of these things are really important for business because they are, you could say, checks and balances in a market system. So trust is important, but it's also really important to listen out for distrust, and when it's there, take note of it so that we can say, hang on, we're not being trusted right now. What should that be telling us? Whereas I think so often today, the response is just to say, oh, distrust is high, we need to build trust, we need to get trust back because trust is what we need. I would argue, no, I don't think that's the best way to go. We might want trust because it helps us in our relationships to be more efficient. If I trust you, you trust me, we don't have to check up so much on each other. But in fact, it's not just about having more and more trust. Too much trust can enable an abuse of power, or maybe not well placed. Instead, we need to have well-placed trust. That is, trust placed where there is trustworthiness, and we need to respond to distrust by cultivating trustworthiness. So I would say trust is important for business, but all the more important is trustworthiness, and again, cultivating a wise approach around all of these things. So in order to gain trust by communicating your own trustworthiness as a startup founder, for example, pitching to an investor, a lot has to happen very quickly. And so if we step back and say, well, first of all, what is trustworthiness? It boils down to competence, commitment, and character. The competence to do the thing that someone is investing in your company, expecting you to do, the commitment to use your competence for them, and the character to do the right thing when push comes to shove. How do you communicate all of that in a moment? I think a lot of that comes down to presence and content about how you communicate. How do we own what we're saying and make sure that it's so well formed, that the idea is so good that not only do we believe it, but it transcends our belief in it. It's a good idea that exists outside of us, because then if it has that quality, then hopefully the investors will be able to see that, and it's not just down to us convincing them. It's the truth of the thing convincing them as well. And then actually, I think trust just takes time. So you can hopefully walk into a room, pitch with conviction and knowledge, and have positive presence. But then it's that iterative relationship. It's the preparation before or after that actually helps build the trust, so that over time, hopefully not over too much time, people are able to trust you and invest well. So I, of course, think it's important for philosophers to be working in companies, but even if we don't have people that would identify as philosophers in companies, it's really important that we have people with philosophical skills working in companies. So by that I mean curiosity, critical thinking, the ability to ask great questions, and these things need to be embedded in our teams for the reason that otherwise we get busy, there's a lot on the line, there's a lot of pressure and money involved, And without curiosity, critical thinking, asking great questions, being able to communicate ideas in a way that lands clearly, then it's hard to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So I think whether or not it's a philosopher or someone with a philosophical skill that you would get from philosophy, they're critical for sometimes making us say, let's just step back and think a little bit more about what we're doing, why we're doing it, to make sure this is really right and good before we move forward.